They fired the waitress after 42 years. Publicly. Like throwing out trash. The new manager smirks, already moving on. What he doesn't know, the homeless boys she secretly fed grew up. 91 bikers just pulled up outside. And they remember everything. Martha Jensen's hands shook as she carried the tray of steaming burgers toward table 7. 42 years of carrying trays, and her hands had never trembled like this. Not during the breakfast rushes of the 80s. Not when her husband died and she'd worked a double shift the next day because the bills wouldn't wait. Not ever. But today was different. Today, the new manager was watching. "Order up," Eddie called from the kitchen, his weathered face creasing with concern. He'd been the cook at Grill House Diner for 20 years, and he knew Martha better than most. "You okay, Martha?" She forced a smile. "Just fine, Eddie. Just fine." The lie tasted bitter. Nothing was fine. Not since Brian Hastings had walked through those doors 6 weeks ago with his pressed suit, his corporate smile, and his tablet full of efficiency metrics. He was 32 years old and looked at the diner like it was something dirty that needed scrubbing. Martha was 70 years old and looked at the diner like it was home. She delivered the burgers to table 7, the Morrison family, regulars for 15 years. Little Zoe Morrison, now not so little at 13, grinned up at her. "Extra pickles, right, Mrs. Jensen?" "You know it, sweetie." Martha's smile came easier now. This was why she stayed. Not for the minimum wage and tired feet. For the Morrisons and the 100 other families who walked through these doors knowing someone cared about them. "Jensen." Brian's voice cut across the diner like a knife. "My office." Now, Martha's heart sank. She glanced at Eddie, who shook his head slowly. She untied her apron with careful hands and walked past the lunch rush crowd toward the small office in the back. Every step felt heavier than the last. Brian didn't look up from his tablet when she entered. "Close the door." She did. "I'm going to make this quick because we're short-staffed out there." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were flat. "Empty. You messed up 3 orders this week. Table 12 got decaf instead of regular. Table 5's eggs were scrambled instead of over easy. And today, the Morrison girl's burger had no pickles. Brian, I fixed all of those right away. The customers were. I don't care if they were happy." He set down his tablet. "I care about efficiency. I care about this diner running like a business, not a charity kitchen. You're slow, you're making mistakes, and frankly, Martha, you're outdated. This isn't 1983 anymore." The words hit her like fists. "I've worked here for 42 years. I know every regular by name. I know their families there." "That's exactly the problem." Brian stood up, smoothing his tie. "You're too attached. Too personal. You spend 5 minutes chatting with every table when you should be turning them over. Corporate wants a 15% increase in table turnover, and you're the bottleneck." Martha felt something crack inside her chest. Are you firing me?" "I'm making a business decision." He opened the office door, and Martha realized with creeping horror that he was walking her out into the dining room. The lunch crowd was in full swing. Conversations buzzed. Silverware clinked. Brian's voice rose, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Martha Jensen, your services are no longer needed at Grill House Diner. You can collect your final paycheck on Friday." The diner fell silent. Martha stood frozen, aware of every eye on her. Mrs. Patterson at table 3, who'd been coming here since Martha's first day. Old Joe at the counter, who'd lost his wife last year and came in every morning because the silence at home hurt too much. The Morrison family, Zoe's mouth hanging open in shock. "Pack up your things," Brian said, quieter now, but somehow more cruel. Today, Martha's throat was tight. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of all these people who'd been her family for 4 decades. She walked to her locker on legs that didn't feel like her own, grabbed her purse and the photo of her late husband she kept taped inside the door, and headed for the exit. "Mrs. Jensen, wait." That was Tom Morrison, rising from his seat. She shook her head, still not trusting her voice. As she pushed through the glass door into the bright afternoon sun, she heard the diner erupt behind her. Angry voices. Someone, it sounded like Eddie, shouting at Brian. But she kept walking. What she didn't see was Marcus Chun at table 9, his phone already out, already recording. What she didn't hear was the video uploading with shaking hands and a simple caption. Grill House Diner fires 70-year-old waitress after 42 years of service. This is Martha. She deserves better. By the time Martha reached the bus stop 3 blocks away, the video had 17 views. By the time she got home to her small apartment and finally let herself cry, it had 2,000. By evening, it had gone viral. And in a clubhouse 40 miles away, a phone buzzed on a scarred wooden table. Hank Ironside Mitchell, president of the Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club, picked it up and watched a 70-year-old woman walk out of a diner with her shoulders shaking. His jaw tightened. "Boys," he called out, his voice carrying through the clubhouse. "Come look at this." 9 men gathered around the phone. Then 12. Then 20. They watched in silence as the young manager's voice echoed from the speaker. "You're outdated. Too old." "That's Martha," whispered Danny Chain Rodriguez, his tattooed arms crossing over his chest. That's Martha from the diner." "The one who fed us?" another voice asked. "Back when we were kids." Hank's phone buzzed again. Then again. Messages flooding the club's group chat from chapters across 3 states. All sharing the same video. All recognizing the same woman. The woman who'd slipped them free meals when they'd been homeless teenagers with nowhere else to go. Who'd never asked questions, never judged, just smiled and said, "Everybody deserves a hot meal." Hank stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Meeting," he said. "Right now? All chapters." "What are we doing, Perez?" Chain asked. Hank's eyes were hard as iron. "We're going to remind that manager what family means." The sun hadn't fully risen when Brian Hastings pulled into the Grill House parking lot, already irritated. His coffee was cold, his shirt had a wrinkle he couldn't smooth out, and corporate had called twice last night about negative social media attention. He'd deleted the video from his own feed. Problem solved. Then he heard it. A low rumble, distant at first, like thunder rolling in from far away. But the sky was clear. Brian frowned, grabbing his briefcase from the passenger seat. The rumble grew louder, deeper. It vibrated through the ground, through his car, through his chest. He looked up. They came around the corner like a wave of chrome and leather. 1 motorcycle, then 5, then 20, then more, riding in tight formation, their engines roaring in perfect unison. The early morning joggers stopped mid-stride. A man walking his dog stood frozen on the sidewalk, mouth open. Brian's hand tightened on his briefcase handle. The motorcycles rolled into the parking lot and the street in front of the diner with military precision. They lined up side by side, front wheels facing the diner's entrance, creating a wall of machines and men that stretched the entire length of the building. 91 bikes. 91 riders. The engines cut off simultaneously. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. Brian's mouth went dry. The riders dismounted. Every single one wore the same leather vest, black with a silver hawk embroidered on the back, wings spread wide. The Iron Hawks. Brian had heard of them. Everyone had. They ran charity toy drives at Christmas and escorted veteran funerals. They also had a reputation for not backing down when someone crossed them. The lead rider removed his helmet. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with gray streaking through his black beard. His eyes found Brian through the diner's glass door, and Brian felt his stomach drop. "Good morning," the man's voice carried across the parking lot. Not threatening, almost friendly. That somehow made it worse. "Name's Hank Mitchell. We're here about Martha Jensen." Brian forced himself to walk to the door and crack it open. "The diner isn't open yet. You need to leave. We're not here to eat." Hank gestured to his crew. "We're here to have a conversation with the community. This is private property. I'll call the police." "You do that," Hank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're on the public sidewalk and street. First Amendment says we can assemble peacefully. We're not breaking any laws." Behind Hank, the bikers were pulling things from their saddlebags. Folding tables, boxes, a portable speaker. They moved with calm efficiency, setting up a makeshift station right there on the sidewalk. Brian's hands started to sweat. "What are you doing?" "Telling a story," Hank said. "Martha's story." One of the bikers, a younger guy with tattoos covering his arms, started handing out flyers to the few pedestrians who'd gathered to watch. An older woman took one, read it, and her hand flew to her mouth. She looked at the diner, then at the bikers, then hurried away. Brian couldn't see what was on the flyers from inside. but he could see their effect. More people were gathering. Some of them were taking photos. One man was filming on his phone. Listen, Brian tried again, stepping outside but staying close to the door. Whatever Martha told you. Martha didn't tell us anything, Hank interrupted. Martha doesn't even know we're here. Yet, he pulled out his phone and showed Brian the screen. The video, the same one corporate had called about. But 47,000 people do. The number hit Brian like a slap. 47,000. That was last night, Hank continued, pocketing his phone. This morning it's at 92,000. Funny how things spread when people care. More bikers were distributing flyers now, talking to the growing crowd in low voices. Brian caught snippets. Fed us when we had nothing, never asked for anything back, 42 years of service. A woman in yoga clothes took a flyer, read it, and immediately pulled out her phone. Brian watched her type furiously, thumb moving across the screen. Posting. Sharing. Making it worse. Eddie arrived for his shift, stopping short when he saw the wall of motorcycles. His weathered face split into a grin. He walked straight up to Hank and shook his hand. About time someone stood up for her. Eddie, get inside, Brian ordered. Eddie ignored him. You boys need anything? Coffee. Water. We're good, Hank said. But thanks, brother. By 7 o'clock, when the diner should have been filling with the breakfast crowd, the parking lot was empty except for Brian's car and Eddie's truck. But the sidewalk across the street was packed. 20, 30, 40 people, all holding flyers, all taking pictures of the bikers standing silent and still in front of their machines. Brian tried calling the police. Twice. The first call, the dispatcher said they'd send someone when they could. The second call, Officer Peterson himself called back. Brian, it's Dave. Look, I drove by. They're not breaking any laws. They're peacefully assembled on public property. And between you and me. His voice dropped. Martha used to feed my kids for free when I was between jobs. A lot of folks in this town remember things like that. The call ended. Brian stood at the window, watching his breakfast crowd walk past the diner to talk with the bikers instead. One of the Iron Hawks had set up a coffee station, free coffee for anyone who stopped by. People were sitting on the curb, reading the flyers, looking at old photographs the bikers had brought. Photographs of Martha, younger, but still recognizable, handing plates of food to teenage boys with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes. Boys who'd grown into the men standing watch outside his diner. His phone buzzed. Corporate again. Brian's hand shook as he answered. Hello. What the hell is going on down there? His district manager's voice was tight. I'm seeing pictures all over Twitter of bikers outside our location. Pictures of flyers. Do you know what those flyers say, Brian? He didn't answer. They tell the story of a waitress who fed homeless kids out of her own pocket for years. Kids who grew up to be the Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club. They have photos, Brian. Testimonials. And at the bottom, it asks one question. Is this how we treat people who give everything? Through the window, Brian watched another couple cross the street to avoid the diner entirely. Fix this, his district manager said. Today, or we'll find someone who can. The line went dead. Brian looked at the wall of bikers, still standing silent as statues, and realized with creeping dread that this was only the beginning. By 10 o'clock, the sidewalk across from Grill House Diner had become an impromptu community gathering. What started with curious onlookers had grown into something Brian couldn't name, something that made his chest tight with panic. Sarah Chun, who owned the flower shop 2 blocks down, was the first to bring a folding chair. She set it up near the bikers' coffee station and sat down with her thermos, reading the flyer for the 3rd time. When her employee called asking where she was, Sarah said simply, taking the morning off. Something more important came up. By 10:30, there were a dozen chairs. By 11, someone had brought a cooler of water bottles. Brian watched from the window as Danny Chain Rodriguez talked with Mrs. Patterson, his regular from table 3. The old woman was crying, but not sad tears. She kept touching Chain's tattooed arm like she couldn't believe he was real. You were so skinny, Brian heard her say through the cracked door. I remember. You used to sit in the corner booth, just watching people eat. Chain nodded, his tough guy exterior cracking. I was 17. Hadn't eaten in 3 days. Martha saw me looking and brought me a full breakfast. Said the cook had made an extra order by mistake. He laughed, but it was thick with emotion. There was no mistake. There never was. She did that every time I came in, for 6 months, until I got on my feet. Mrs. Patterson pulled him into a hug. A 68-year-old grandmother hugging a 6-foot-tall biker covered in tattoos, and it was the most natural thing in the world. Brian's hands clenched into fists. This was getting out of control. Inside the diner, Eddie had made exactly 4 orders all morning. The Morrison family hadn't come in. Neither had Joe from the counter, or the Valdez family, or any of the other regulars who usually packed the place until noon. "They're all out there," Eddie said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. He nodded toward the window, listening to Martha's stories. "They're not Martha's stories," Brian snapped. "They're manipulative propaganda designed to tell the truth." Eddie interrupted. "Yeah, terrible thing, the truth." Another biker, this one with gray in his beard and glasses, was showing photographs to a small crowd. Real photographs, old and faded, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. There was Martha, maybe 30 years younger, her dark hair pulled back, smiling as she handed a plate to a teenage boy who looked like he might cry from gratitude. "That's me," the biker was saying. 1997. I'd just aged out of foster care. Nowhere to go, nothing to eat. Martha made sure I got a meal every single day for 2 months. Never asked for a dime. A woman in the crowd, Brian recognized her as a reporter from the local paper, was scribbling furiously in her notebook. Perfect. Just perfect. His phone rang again. Corporate. 3rd time this morning. "The video is at 200,000 views, his district manager said without preamble. "We have a situation, Brian. A PR nightmare. The hashtag Justice for Martha is trending locally. Do you understand what that means?" Brian's stomach churned. "I'm handling it. You're clearly not. I want you to draft an apology, effective immediately. We'll issue it through our social media channels." "An apology?" Brian's voice rose. "I made a business decision. She was underperforming. She was making mistakes. She was there for 42 years. His manager's voice cracked through the phone. "Do you know how many people have a connection to someone who's been somewhere 42 years? Do you know how this looks?" Through the window, Brian saw Tom Morrison arrive, not to eat, but to join the crowd. He shook hands with Hank, accepting a flyer even though he'd clearly already seen it. "There are 91 bikers outside your location," his manager continued. "They're not leaving. And from what I'm seeing online, they're not planning to. Fox 12 News just called our corporate office asking for a statement. This is escalating." The call ended, and Brian realized his breakfast shift was over. He'd served 4 tables. 4. On a Thursday morning that should have brought in 50. He stepped outside, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "You've made your point. You can leave now." Hank looked at him with something like pity. "We haven't made our point yet. Our point gets made when Martha gets the respect she deserves. She was underperforming. She fed 73 children over 20 years, another biker interrupted. This one was younger, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes. "I was one of them. I'm a social worker now because of her. Because she showed me what kindness looks like." A news van pulled up across the street. Channel 7. A reporter climbed out with a cameraman, immediately drawn to the crowd. Brian's heart hammered. "You need to leave. Now. This is harassment. This is free speech," Hank said calmly. "And family taking care of family." The reporter was already interviewing Mrs. Patterson. Brian could see her gesturing animatedly, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. The camera swung to capture the line of motorcycles, the coffee station, the growing crowd of supporters. Eddie appeared at Brian's elbow. "You should watch the lunch crowd. Or rather, the lack of 1 inch." He was right. Noon came and went. The lunch rush that usually filled every booth and lined customers at the door never materialized. People walked by the diner, glanced at the bikers, and kept going, either to join the gathering or to eat somewhere else entirely. By 1 o'clock, Brian had served 7 tables total, on a day when he should have served 80. The reporter finished her interviews and approached Hank. Brian couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw Hank pull out his phone and make a call. Saw him nod. Saw him smile. 10 minutes later, 3 pickup trucks arrived, beds loaded with equipment. Grills, tables, speakers, coolers. "What are you doing?" Brian called out, his voice pitching higher than he intended. Hank looked back at him, and for the first time, His expression held something like satisfaction. We're throwing a party. Tomorrow. Right across the street in that empty lot. A community cookout. Free food, music, and a chance for everyone to share their Martha stories properly. You can't. Already got the permit, Hank said. City approved it this morning. Turns out when 91 registered voters ask for something, the city council listens. Brian watched them start unloading the trucks, watched the crowd cheer, watched his entire world tilt sideways. His phone buzzed. A text from corporate. Conference call. 6 p.m. Be ready to explain your choices. Inside the diner, through the glass, Brian could see the empty booths. The silent register. Eddie standing with his arms crossed, not even pretending to look busy. And across the street, the Iron Hawks were building something Brian finally understood he couldn't stop. A reckoning. Martha Jensen sat in her small living room, staring at the television without really seeing it. She'd been doing that a lot in the past 2 days. Staring, thinking, trying to figure out what came next for a 70-year-old woman with 42 years of experience that apparently didn't matter anymore. Her daughter Linda had called 3 times from Oregon, furious and helpless. Mom, you should sue. You should fight this, but Martha was tired. So tired. Fighting felt like something for younger people with more years ahead of them than behind. She reached for her coffee mug, stone cold now, and that's when the 5 o'clock news started. We begin tonight with a developing story that has captured the hearts of our community, the anchor said. A local diner, a fired waitress, and 91 bikers who refused to back down. Martha's mug slipped from her fingers, coffee splashing across her lap. She didn't notice. There, on her television screen, was Grill House Diner. Her diner. But the parking lot was empty, and across the street, her hand flew to her mouth. Across the street was something impossible. The empty lot had been transformed. White tents billowed in the evening breeze. Long tables stretched in neat rows, covered with red and white checkered cloths. Industrial grills sent smoke curling into the sky, and she could almost smell the burgers and hot dogs through the screen. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, twinkling in the approaching dusk. And everywhere, there were motorcycles, lined up like sentinels, gleaming in the golden light. But it was the banner that made her cry. 20 feet long, hung between 2 posts. Thank you, Martha. 42 years of kindness. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. The camera panned across the crowd. There had to be 200 people. More. Families with children running between the tables. Teenagers helping serve food. And in the center of it all, men in leather vests working the grills with the precision of a professional kitchen. The reporter's voice continued. The Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club organized this community cookout in just 24 hours after 70-year-old Martha Jensen was fired from her job of 42 years. But this isn't just about a job. It's about something much deeper. The screen cut to Hank, standing beside one of the grills, flipping burgers. Martha fed us when we were nobody, he said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. When we were hungry kids with nowhere to go and no reason to hope. She never asked for thanks, never wanted recognition. She just cared. So now it's our turn to care back. Another cut, this time to a woman Martha recognized. Sarah Chun from the flower shop. Martha remembered my wedding anniversary every year for 15 years, Sarah said, tears in her eyes. She'd always have a special dessert waiting on the house. That's who she is. Eddie appeared on screen next, still in his cook's apron. In 42 years, I never once saw Martha turn away someone who was hungry. Not once. If they couldn't pay, she'd cover it herself. I know because I've seen the notebook she kept in her locker. Hundreds of meals, all accounted for, all paid from her own tips. Martha's hands shook. She'd thought no one knew about that notebook. The camera shifted to show children playing near the tables, laughing and chasing each other while adults watched with warm smiles. The Iron Hawks had set up a small stage where a local band was playing soft rock, nothing loud or aggressive. Just community. All of this food is free, the reporter explained, funded by donations from the Iron Hawks and local businesses who've known Martha for years. We're told over 300 people have come through already, and more are arriving by the minute. The scene cut to Brian, intercepted outside the diner. He looked exhausted, his earlier confidence completely gone. No comment. he muttered, trying to brush past the camera. Mr. Hastings, do you have any response to the community's show of support for Mrs. Jensen? I said no comment. He practically ran to his car. Back to the cookout. The camera found Tom Morrison and his family. Little Zoe held a poster she'd clearly made herself. "We love you, Mrs. Jensen," with hearts drawn in crayon. "She taught my daughter that kindness matters more than speed," Tom said. "That knowing someone's name is more valuable than a quick table turnover. Those aren't outdated values. Those are the only values that matter." Martha realized she was sobbing. Full, body-shaking sobs that she couldn't control and didn't want to. These people, these beautiful, stubborn, loyal people, had done this for her. For her. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Local area code. "Hello." Her voice cracked. "Mrs. Jensen? This is Danny Rodriguez. I don't know if you remember me, but..." "Shane." The nickname came back instantly. "Oh, honey, of course I remember you." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. "We're having a party, Mrs. J. In your honor. We wanted you to know. In case you're watching the news." "I'm watching." She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "Danny, you didn't have to." "Yeah, we did." His voice was firm now. "You saved my life. You saved a lot of lives. The least we can do is return the favor." Through the phone, she could hear the sounds of the cookout. Music, laughter, the sizzle of food on grills. Life. "I don't know what to say," Martha whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that we're here. We're not going anywhere until this is made right. That's a promise." After they hung up, Martha sat holding the phone, watching the screen through blurred vision. A third news van had arrived. Then a fourth. The story was spreading, rippling outward like stones in a pond. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Mom, are you seeing this? I'm booking a flight. I'll be there tomorrow." Then another text, this time from her neighbor. "The whole country's going to know your name by morning. You deserve this. Every bit of it." On the television, the camera had found an older biker. She squinted. Was that little Michael Brennan, all grown up, showing old photographs to a crowd? Photos of her. Photos of all those kids she'd fed, one plate at a time, one smile at a time, never keeping count because that's not what love did. The reporter signed off. "This story is far from over. The Iron Hawks say they'll remain here as long as it takes." And judging by the community's response, this small act of firing one waitress might just become the mistake that changes everything. Reporting live, Jennifer Martinez, Channel 7 News. Martha turned off the television and sat in the sudden silence of her apartment. But it wasn't silent, not really. She could feel it. The rumble of 91 motorcycles, the warmth of 200 people gathering in her name, the steady beat of hearts refusing to let kindness be forgotten. For the first time in 2 days, Martha Jensen smiled. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go see them. Her family. Brian woke up at 5 a.m. to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His district manager. His regional director. Someone from corporate communications he'd never even heard of. All with the same basic message. Check social media. Now. He opened Twitter with shaking hands. Hashtag Justice for Martha was trending. Not locally. Nationally. Number 7 in the United States. His stomach dropped. The first post had 400,000 likes. A photo of the cookout from last night. The banner glowing under string lights. Families gathered around tables. Bikers serving food with genuine smiles. The caption read, 91 bikers showed up for a 70-year-old waitress fired after 42 years. This is what loyalty looks like. But it was the replies that made his blood run cold. Hundreds of them. Thousands. People from across the country sharing their own stories. I had a Martha too. Her name was Rose. Worked at the diner near my high school. She slipped me free meals when my parents kicked me out. I never forgot. Martha paid for my mom's lunch every day for a week when mom lost her job. We never asked. She just knew. People like this are why small towns matter. This is everything wrong with corporate America in one story. 42 years of loyalty, and they toss her out like garbage. A video had gone even more viral. 6 million views overnight. Someone had compiled clips from multiple news stations, all covering the same story, interspersed with photos of Martha through the decades. Young Martha in the 1980s with her bright smile. Martha in the 90s serving teenagers who would become the Iron Hawks. Martha last year at the diner's anniversary party, cutting a cake while regulars cheered. The video ended with footage of her walking out of the diner 2 days ago, shoulders shaking, and text overlay. She gave everything. They gave her nothing. Brian's phone rang. Corporate. He answered. Pack your things, the voice on the other end said. No greeting. No preamble. We have executives flying in today. They'll be there by noon. Do not speak to any reporters. Do not make any statements. Do not make this worse than it already is. I can fix this. You can't. The line went dead. By 7 a.m., when Brian arrived at the diner, the parking lot was still empty. But across the street, the cookout had started up again. He counted at least 300 people already, and the sun had barely risen. More were arriving in a steady stream. The bikers had rotated shifts overnight. 20 stayed while the others went home to rest, then swapped out at dawn. Now all 91 were back, and they brought reinforcements, families, friends, supporters. The empty lot looked like a festival. Eddie was already inside, standing at the window with his arms crossed. Morning shift is usually packed by now, he said without looking at Brian. Funny how that works. Brian ignored him and checked the reservation system. 0 bookings for breakfast. 0 for lunch. 3 cancellations for dinner. The phone wasn't ringing. The door wasn't opening. At 8 o'clock, exactly one customer walked in, a middle-aged man in a business suit who clearly hadn't checked social media. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee and eggs, then looked around at the empty diner with growing confusion. Where is everyone? He asked Eddie. Eddie nodded toward the window. Across the street, where loyalty lives. The man looked, saw the crowd, and pulled out his phone. 2 minutes of scrolling later, he stood up. Actually, I think I'll eat over there. He dropped a 5 on the counter and left. Eddie pocketed the money and didn't say a word. He didn't have to. By 9 a.m., the story had hit major news outlets. CNN ran a 3-minute segment during their morning show. Fox News picked it up. Even Good Morning America sent a correspondent to cover it. The correspondent wasn't at the diner, though. She was at the cookout, interviewing Hank while families ate pancakes the bikers had cooked at dawn. This isn't about revenge, Hank told the camera. This is about showing the world what matters. Martha spent 42 years proving that people are more important than profits. We're just returning the favor. The internet exploded. Again, celebrities started chiming in. A famous chef with 3 million followers tweeted, Martha Jensen is the kind of person restaurants should be built around, not the kind they throw away. Shame on at Grill House Diner. The official Grill House corporate account had gone silent. Every post from the past week was flooded with angry comments. Fire Brian, rehire Martha, boycott until this is fixed. At 10:30, a black SUV pulled up to the diner. 2 men and a woman climbed out, all wearing expensive suits and grim expressions. Corporate executives. They walked past Brian without acknowledging him and disappeared into the back office. Through the window, Brian watched the cookout continue to grow. A local business owner had donated a bounce house for kids. Someone else brought a cotton candy machine. The Iron Hawks had set up a memory board where people could write notes to Martha or share stories. It was already covered, front and back, top to bottom, with messages. Thank you for feeding me when I was pregnant and broke. You saved my baby's life. You taught me that kindness doesn't cost anything but means everything. 42 years of service. 42 years of love. You deserved so much better. A news helicopter circled overhead, filming the contrast. The packed, joyful cookout on one side of the street, the dark, empty diner on the other. Brian's phone buzzed with an email from corporate communications. Subject line, Crisis Management Protocol, Urgent. He opened it. The first line made his knees weak. We have been made aware of an audio recording from a management meeting held 3 days ago. His mouth went dry. The meeting. The one where he'd vented to the assistant manager about Martha. About how these old-timers need to learn when to quit, and sentimental nonsense doesn't pay the bills. Someone had recorded it, and judging by the email, someone was about to release it. Brian looked across the street one more time. The Iron Hawks stood in formation near their bikes, arms crossed, watching the diner with patient, knowing eyes. They'd been here for 2 days straight. They'd organized a massive community event in under 24 hours. They'd turned his firing of one old waitress into a national story. And somehow, Brian knew with cold certainty they'd only just begun. The office door opened behind him. One of the executives stepped out, her face unreadable. "Mr. Hastings," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Now, as Brian followed her into the office, he saw Hank pull out his phone across the street and nod to someone. A signal. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. The three corporate executives sat behind Eddie's desk like judges at a trial. Brian stood because no one offered him a chair. "We're implementing immediate damage control," the woman, Victoria Chun, Senior VP of Operations, said crisply. "You're going to draft a public apology. We'll offer Martha her job back with a raise. We'll run a promotion, 20% off all meals this week." That won't work," the younger executive interrupted, staring at his tablet. His face had gone pale. "It just dropped." "Oh God, it just dropped." "What dropped?" Victoria snapped. He turned the tablet around. It was a Twitter post from an account called @truthbombs_2025, uploaded 3 minutes ago. Want to know what Brian Hastings really thinks about Martha Jensen? Here's the audio from his management meeting. Listen for yourself. #Justice for Martha. The audio file started playing automatically. Brian's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the small office. "Look, I get it. She's been here forever, but that's exactly the problem. These old-timers need to learn when to quit. She's slow, she's sentimental, and frankly, she's a liability. You should see her with customers, chatting about their kids, their jobs, their lives. We're running a restaurant, not a therapy session." Another voice, his assistant manager, Chris, laughed nervously. "The customers seem to like it, though. The customers are idiots if they think small talk matters more than efficiency. Martha represents everything that's wrong with this place. Outdated thinking, outdated service. She probably thinks a smartphone is witchcraft." More laughter on the recording. Then Brian's voice again, crueler now. "Tuesday, I'm going to have a conversation with her. Time to put the old girl out to pasture. She can go bake cookies for her grandkids, or whatever it is old people do." The recording ended. The silence in the office was deafening. Victoria's face had turned to stone. "Tell me that's not you." Brian's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. "Tell me," she repeated, each word sharp as a knife, "that we did not just have our manager's voice recorded mocking a 70-year-old employee. Tell me he didn't call her a liability and an old girl and say she belongs in pasture like an animal." "I was venting," Brian finally managed. "It was a private conversation." "Nothing is private anymore." Victoria slammed her hand on the desk. "How do you not know that? How do you not understand that everything you say can and will be recorded and shared?" The younger executive was scrolling frantically. "It's already at 50,000 retweets. People are furious." The comments, he looked sick. "I can't even read most of these out loud." Brian pulled out his own phone with shaking hands. The audio was everywhere. On Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Someone had even made it into a video with text overlay highlighting the worst parts. "Old girl, out to pasture, outdated thinking." The comments were brutal. "This is how corporate America sees people who dedicated their lives. Disgusting. Old girl. She's a human being who worked 42 years. Fire this man immediately. I hope Brian Hastings never works in management again. This is elder abuse." One comment had over 100,000 likes. The bikers knew. They knew he was this kind of person. That's why they showed up. Brian looked out the window. Across the street, a massive new banner had gone up, clearly prepared in advance. "Listen to how they really feel," with a QR code beneath it. People were scanning it with their phones, listening, their faces transforming from curiosity to outrage. The crowd had doubled, maybe tripled. 400 people. 500. More news vans were arriving. A satellite truck from a national network. And through it all, the 91 bikers stood like sentinels, arms crossed, saying nothing. They didn't need to. They'd let Brian's own words do the talking. "Chris leaked it," Brian said suddenly. "My assistant manager. He must have recorded the meeting." Chris resigned this morning. The third executive, Marcus, from HR, said flatly. "Send a letter to corporate saying He couldn't work for someone who treated employees like garbage. He copied the media on it. Of course he did. Victoria stood up, smoothing her suit with sharp, angry movements. Here's what's going to happen. We're holding a press conference. Today, in 1 hour. We're going to announce that you're being terminated effective immediately. We're going to announce that Martha Jensen will be offered full reinstatement with back pay, a raise, and a formal written apology from corporate headquarters. You're firing me? Brian's voice cracked. You're throwing me under the bus. You threw yourself under the bus the moment you opened your mouth. Victoria shot back. We're just acknowledging reality. Your employment with Grill House Restaurant Group is terminated for cause. Security will escort you from the premises after the press conference. You have 30 minutes to clean out your locker. This is insane. I made one mistake. You made dozens of mistakes, Marcus interrupted. You humiliated an employee publicly. You damaged our brand irreparably. And worst of all, you showed the world exactly the kind of person we don't want representing our company. Your termination is effective immediately, and we will not be providing a reference. Victoria walked to the window and looked out at the crowd. The cameras, the bikers, the families holding signs. The sheer force of community that had gathered in 3 days. They won, she said quietly. They actually won. Brian felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. 3 days ago he'd been the manager, the authority, the one in control. Now he was being fired in front of national media because of one old waitress who couldn't keep up with the times. Except she hadn't been the one who couldn't keep up. He saw that now, too late. Martha had understood something he never did. That people mattered more than metrics. That loyalty was worth more than table turnover. That 42 years of kindness built something a spreadsheet could never measure. And when you attacked that, when you treated it like it was worthless, the world attacked back. The press conference is in 55 minutes, Victoria said. I suggest you use this time to think about what you're going to do next. Because your career in restaurant management is over. She walked out, Marcus following. The younger executive paused at the door, looking at Brian with something like pity. For what it's worth, he said, you should have just left her alone. She was retiring in a year anyway. The door closed. Brian stood in the empty office, his career imploding around him, and heard the crowd outside start to cheer. Someone must have seen the executives arrive. Someone must have guessed what was coming. Across the street, Hank raised his phone to his ear, spoke a few words, smiled. Then he gestured to 2 of his fellow bikers. They climbed on their bikes and rode off, heading toward the residential part of town, heading toward Martha's apartment. It was time to bring her home. Martha was making tea when she heard the motorcycles. 2 of them, their engines rumbling to a stop outside her apartment building. She froze, spoon suspended over her mug, and listened to heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. 3 knocks on her door, firm but gentle. She opened it to find Hank Mitchell and Danny Rodriguez standing in her hallway, helmets tucked under their arms. Up close, they looked older than she remembered, harder around the edges, weathered by years she hadn't witnessed. But their eyes held the same thing they'd held when they were hungry teenagers, hope. Hello, Martha, Hank said softly. Her hand flew to her mouth. You're Hank. Little Hank who always ordered extra toast. His tough exterior cracked, and suddenly he was smiling like the boy he'd been. You remember. I remember all of you, her eyes filled. What are you doing here? We came to take you to the cookout, Danny said. If you want to come, we'd be honored to escort you. Martha looked between them, these grown men with their leather and tattoos and motorcycle club colors, and saw the teenagers who'd sat in her corner booth, trying to be invisible while their stomachs growled. I don't understand why you're doing all this, she whispered. Hank stepped forward. You gave us food when we had none. You gave us dignity when the world treated us like trash. You never made us feel small. You made us feel seen. That's worth everything, Martha. Everything. She grabbed her purse before she could talk herself out of it. Then let's go. They'd brought a 3rd bike with a passenger seat. Danny helped her on, showing her where to hold, making sure she was secure. You ever been on a motorcycle before, Mrs. J? Not since 1972, she admitted, and they laughed. The ride was short but surreal. Wind in her hair, the rumble of the engine beneath her, and the impossible reality that these men, these boys she'd helped so long ago, were bringing her to something she couldn't quite imagine. When they turned the corner and she saw the crowd, her breath caught. The empty lot was transformed into something magical. Hundreds of people milled between the tables, children played in the grass, and smoke from the grills carried the smell of home-cooked food through the air. But it was the banner that made her heart stop. Her name, 20 feet high. Thank you, Martha. 42 years of kindness. Oh my, she breathed. The engines cut off. For a moment, everything seemed suspended. Martha sitting on the back of Danny's bike, staring at the impossible scene before her. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "She's here. Martha's here." The effect was instantaneous. Conversation stopped. People turned. And then, as if choreographed, every single biker, all 91 of them, stood at attention beside their motorcycles. Silent, respectful, honoring her. The crowd parted as Danny helped Martha off the bike. Her legs felt unsteady, but Hank was there, offering his arm. Together, they walked her toward the center of the gathering. The silence stretched. Martha looked around at all these faces, some she knew, many she didn't, all watching her with expressions of gratitude and love. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire crowd erupted. Applause thundered across the lot, mixed with cheers and whistles. People stood, some with tears streaming down their faces. The children didn't fully understand, but they clapped too, caught up in the joy. Martha's hand covered her mouth as she cried. She couldn't help it. 42 years of quiet service, of small kindnesses she'd never thought about twice, and here was the response. Not anger that she'd been fired, not pity, but celebration, love. The applause finally faded, and people began to approach, not all at once, but in a respectful line, like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. A man in his 40s came first, his eyes red. "Mrs. Jensen, you probably don't remember me. I'm Michael Brennan. You used to serve me breakfast before school. My dad was. He wasn't around much. You'd sneak me extra bacon and ask about my homework." He pulled out a worn photograph, a teenage boy, too thin, sitting in a diner booth. "You took this. Told me I should document the good days. It got me through the bad ones." Martha hugged him, this stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. A woman with gray streaking her hair came next. "You paid for my mother's meals when she was dying of cancer. Every day for 3 months. You told her the owner was running a special, but we knew. We always knew. Because of you, she spent her last days eating real food, not hospital meals. You gave her dignity." More people came. A young man who'd been homeless at 17. She'd let him wash dishes in exchange for meals until he found a job. A couple who'd had their wedding rehearsal dinner at the diner because Martha had secretly coordinated with Eddie to make it special. A teacher who'd been a struggling student when Martha tutored him in math during slow afternoons. Story after story, life after life she'd touched without ever realizing the full weight of her impact. Then Shane stepped forward, holding a wooden box. "We all pitched in," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Wanted to show you something." He opened the box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of Martha through the decades, serving food, laughing with customers, standing behind the counter with that gentle smile. But more than that, photos of the people she'd helped. Before and after. Hungry teenagers who became businessmen. Struggling mothers who became community leaders. Lost kids who found their way. "You changed lives," Shane said simply. "You changed our lives. We wanted you to see the proof." Martha's hands shook as she touched the photos. "I was just doing my job." "No," Hank said firmly, stepping beside her. "You were doing something much more important. You were showing us that we mattered, that we were worth caring about. In a world that told us we were nothing, you told us we were something. That's not a job, Martha. That's a calling." The crowd cheered again, and Martha looked around at all these beautiful faces. At the bikers who'd become protectors. At the community that refused to let kindness be forgotten. At the children playing and the families eating and the pure, stubborn loyalty of people who remembered. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice small but clear. "Thank you for remembering an old woman who just wanted to help." "We'll never forget," Danny said. "Not ever." Sarah Chin appeared with a plate of food. "You must be hungry. Let us feed you for once." And for the first time in 42 years, Martha Jensen sat down while other people served her. The bikers made sure her plate never emptied. The families made sure she never sat alone. The children brought her drawings and flowers. And across the street, through the diner's window, Brian watched the woman he'd called outdated receive the kind of honor money could never buy. It was the last thing he saw before security escorted him out the back door, his personal items in a cardboard box, his career in ruins. Martha never even noticed. She was too busy being home. Victoria Chen stood before a hastily assembled podium on the sidewalk outside Grill House Diner, watching news crews position their cameras. 6 stations. Maybe more. This was no longer a local story. This was national humiliation that required a national response. Behind her, the diner sat empty and dark. Across the street, the cookout hummed with life, a stark visual contrast that every camera would capture. Perfect. She smoothed her suit and nodded to her communications director. Time to stop the bleeding. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Victoria began, her voice amplified by the microphone. The crowd at the cookout quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward her. My name is Victoria Chun, Senior Vice President of Operations for Grill House Restaurant Group. I'm here today to address the situation regarding Martha Jensen and the actions of our former manager, Brian Hastings. Former. The word rippled through the crowd. Phones came up, recording. 3 days ago, Mrs. Jensen was terminated from her position after 42 years of exemplary service. This termination was wrong. It was cruel, and it does not reflect the values that Grill House Restaurant Group was built upon or the values we intend to uphold moving forward. She paused, letting that sink in. Across the street, Martha sat at a picnic table, surrounded by people, her hand at her throat. Someone, it looked like Sarah Chun, was whispering in her ear, translating the announcement. Effective immediately, Brian Hastings is no longer employed by our company. His termination is for cause, and he will not be returning to any of our locations in any capacity. The audio recording that surfaced this morning revealed conduct that is unconscionable and indefensible. We do not tolerate discrimination, ageism, or the mistreatment of employees who have dedicated their lives to serving our customers. A reporter called out, "Is this just damage control?" Victoria met the camera's gaze directly. This is accountability. Mr. Hastings created this situation through his choices. We're correcting those choices. She glanced at her notes, though she'd memorized every word. We are formally offering Martha Jensen full reinstatement to her position, effective immediately, with the following terms: full back pay for all missed days, a 20% salary increase, health benefits extended through her retirement, and a written apology from our CEO, which will be delivered personally. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, a few whistles. Martha's hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking. The women around her hugged her tight. But Victoria wasn't finished. Furthermore, we are committing to a full review of all management practices at this location and across our company. We built this business on community values, on the idea that diners are more than just restaurants. They're gathering places where people matter. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We're finding our way back. She looked directly at the cookout, at the Iron Hawks standing in formation near their bikes. Hank Mitchell stood at the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But when their eyes met, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Message received. Message acknowledged. We would also like to thank the Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club and this incredible community for standing up when it mattered most. You reminded us, and the world, what loyalty looks like, what family looks like, what matters. Another reporter shouted, "Will Martha accept the offer?" Victoria turned toward the cookout. "That's not my decision to make. It's hers. And frankly, after what we put her through, we'd understand if she told us to go to hell." That got a surprised laugh from the crowd. Even some of the bikers cracked smiles. "But we hope she'll come back. Not because we need her, though we do, but because she deserves to finish her career on her own terms. With dignity, with respect, with the honor she earned through 42 years of service that changed hundreds of lives." Victoria stepped back from the microphone. Her communications director moved forward to handle questions from the press, but Victoria's eyes stayed on Martha across the street. The old woman stood slowly, helped to her feet by Hank and Danny. The crowd parted as she walked toward the street, toward the diner, toward Victoria. The news cameras swiveled to follow her. Martha crossed the street with careful steps, her chin high, her eyes clear. When she reached the sidewalk where Victoria stood, the two women faced each other. "Mrs. Jensen," Victoria said quietly, away from the microphones. "I can't undo what happened to you, but I can promise you that it will never happen again. Not on my watch." Martha studied her for a long moment. "You mean that?" "Every word." "And the other employees? The cooks, the servers, the people who've been here for years. Protected, valued, treated the way you should have been treated from the beginning." Martha glanced back at the cookout, at the bikers, at the community that had rallied for her. Then she looked at the dark diner behind Victoria, her diner, the place she'd poured her heart into for 4 decades. "I'll come back," she said finally. "But part-time. On my terms. And I wanted he protected. He stood by me when it mattered." "Done," Victoria said immediately. "Whatever you want, Mrs. Jensen. You've earned it." Martha nodded. Then, to Victoria's surprise, she stepped forward and hugged her. "Thank you for doing the right thing, even if it took a while to get here." The cameras captured it all. The embrace. The moment a corporation bent its knee to decency. The image would be on every news site by evening. Elderly waitress and corporate executive, bridging the gap that should never have existed in the first place. When they separated, Martha turned toward the crowd. Someone had brought a microphone. "I want to thank all of you," Martha said, her voice amplified but still gentle. "I never expected this. Never imagined that feeding a few hungry kids would come back to me like this. But that's the thing about kindness. You never know where it goes. You never know who's watching, who's remembering." She looked at the Iron Hawks, and her voice cracked. "You boys saved me, just like I tried to save you all those years ago. I guess we're even now." "Never even," Hank called out. "You'll always be ahead, Martha. Always." The crowd cheered again, and someone started chanting, "Martha, Martha, Martha." She laughed through her tears, overwhelmed and humbled and home. Victoria watched from the sidelines as news crews interviewed Martha, as the bikers formed a protective circle around her, as the community celebration resumed with even more energy than before. Her phone buzzed with messages from the CEO, from the board, from shareholders. All saying the same thing, "Well handled." But Victoria knew the truth. She hadn't handled anything. The Iron Hawks had. The community had. Martha herself had, by living a life that inspired this kind of loyalty in the first place. All Victoria had done was recognize when she'd been beaten and surrender gracefully. Sometimes, that was the only smart move left. As sunset painted the sky orange and purple, the cookout showed no signs of slowing. If anything, more people had arrived, drawn by the news coverage, by the story, by the chance to witness something rare and beautiful, a community that refused to let goodness go unrewarded. And in the center of it all, Martha Jensen sat surrounded by family she'd created one meal at a time, one kindness at a time, one moment at a time. 42 years of work, reduced to 3 days of reckoning. And in the end, love won. Martha woke to the sound of her phone buzzing, and buzzing, and buzzing. She fumbled for it on her nightstand, squinting at the screen. 63 text messages. 47 missed calls. Her inbox showed 200+ unread emails. "Good Lord," she muttered. The first text was from Linda, her daughter. "Mom, you're on CNN. Like, right now. Turn on the TV." Martha shuffled to her living room and switched on the television. There she was, a photo from yesterday, her hands covering her face as she cried, surrounded by the bikers and the community. The cheering beneath read, "Waitress fired after 42 years gets justice. A story of loyalty and community." The anchor's voice was warm. "This story has captured hearts across the nation." Martha Jensen, the 70-year-old waitress who was publicly fired earlier this week, has been reinstated with a raise and an apology after the Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club and her entire community rallied to her defense. The hashtag Justice for Martha has been used over 3 million times, with people sharing stories of their own Marthas, unsung heroes in their communities who've shown them kindness when they needed it most. The segment cut to interviews from yesterday. Hank talking about the homeless teens Martha fed, Chain showing the photographs. Tom Morrison with his daughter Zoe, holding her handmade sign. Then new footage appeared from other cities, other states. A diner in Ohio had hung a banner reading, "We Stand with Martha." A restaurant in Texas offered free meals to seniors all week in her honor. A woman in Seattle started a GoFundMe to recognize long-serving waitstaff in her community. It had already raised $50,000. Martha sat down hard on her couch, tears streaming. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID said Grill House Diner. "Hello. Martha, it's Eddie." His voice was thick with emotion. "You need to see this. Can you come down here?" "Ah, yes. Give me an hour." She dressed carefully, her favorite blue cardigan, comfortable shoes. When she stepped outside, she found Shane waiting on his motorcycle, helmet in hand. "Morning, Mrs. J. Thought you might need a ride." The streets were busier than usual. As they rode past the elementary school, children on the playground pointed and waved. A crossing guard gave them a thumbs up. At the intersection, a driver rolled down his window and called out, "We love you, Martha." She laughed, bewildered and grateful all at once. When they turned onto Main Street, Martha gasped. The diner's parking lot was full, but not with cars, with flowers. Dozens of bouquets lined the sidewalk, leaning against the building's brick facade. Handwritten signs were taped to the windows. "Thank you, Martha. 42 years of kindness. You matter." But more than that, every parking spot was full. The breakfast rush she'd served for 42 years had returned. With force. Shane helped her off the bike and escorted her to the entrance. Inside, every booth was packed. Every stool at the counter taken. People stood waiting for tables, and nobody seemed to mind. Eddie spotted her from the kitchen and waved. His face split in the biggest grin she'd ever seen. The staff, young servers she barely knew, stopped what they were doing and started clapping. Then the customers joined in. Standing ovation. For walking through the door. Okay, Martha said, blushing furiously. "Let me get my apron on. We've got people to feed." A new manager stood near the register. Not Brian, thank God. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She stepped forward and extended her hand. "Mrs. Jensen, I'm Denise Patterson. Corporate sent me to manage during the transition. I want you to know, I'm here to support you and this staff. That's all. Nothing more." Martha shook her hand, measuring her. "You related to Mrs. Patterson who comes in for lunch?" Denise smiled. "My mother. She talks about you constantly. Then we'll get along just fine." Martha tied on her apron, the same one she'd worn for years, carefully washed and waiting in her locker, and picked up her order pad. Muscle memory kicked in immediately. Table 3 needed coffee. Table 7 wanted more syrup. The counter customer was ready to order. But something was different. Between taking orders, customers stopped her, not to demand service, but to thank her, to tell her their stories, to say they'd driven an extra 20 minutes just to eat here today, just to support her. A young mother with 2 toddlers grabbed Martha's hand. "My grandmother was like you. She worked at a diner for 30 years. She died last month, and nobody noticed. But you? The world noticed you. That means something. That means she mattered too." Martha squeezed her hand. She did matter. They all matter. Outside, the Iron Hawks had returned to their formation, bikes parked in respectful rows along the street. But the energy was different now. They weren't protesting. They weren't guarding. They were simply present, a reminder of what had happened, what had been won, what loyalty looked like. Hank sat on his bike, reading messages on his phone. Requests from other towns, other cities, asking the Iron Hawks to help with similar situations. A nursing home worker fired after 20 years. A teacher forced out for being too old. The story had rippled outward, inspiring others to stand up. "We can't help everyone," Shane said, reading over his shoulder. "No," Hank agreed. "But we can remind people they're not alone. That's something." By noon, the line outside the diner stretched down the block. Denise had to put names on a waiting list. Martha worked her section with practiced ease, her feet remembering the rhythm, her hands remembering the weight of the plates. But she took her time. She asked about kids and jobs and lives. She remembered names. She made people feel seen. Because that's what mattered. That's what had always mattered. A news crew from Good Morning America arrived mid-shift, wanting a follow-up segment. Denise handled it diplomatically, keeping them outside until Martha's lunch rush ended. When they finally got their interview, Martha stood on the sidewalk with Hank beside her, the diner packed with customers behind them. "What do you want people to take away from this story?" the reporter asked. Martha thought for a moment. That kindness isn't outdated. That people matter more than profits. And that when you take care of others, sometimes, just sometimes, they take care of you right back. Any message for others who've been treated unfairly? Stand up, Martha said firmly, and find your people. The ones who remember. The ones who care. They're out there. I promise. The segment would air the next morning to 15 million viewers. By evening, when Martha's shift finally ended, she was exhausted but glowing. Eddie caught her at the door. "Same time tomorrow?" She smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." "But Eddie? Part-time, remember? I'm too old to work doubles anymore." He laughed. "Whatever you say, boss." Shane drove her home as the sun set, painting Main Street gold. The diner glowed behind them, warm and full and alive again. Martha looked back once, watching the Iron Hawks pack up for the evening, their formation breaking into friendly chaos as they joked and laughed. Her family, her unlikely, beautiful, loyal family. And somewhere across the country, people were reading her story, recognizing their own Marthas, deciding to speak up, to stand up, to remember that dignity mattered, that service mattered, that 42 years of kindness should never be thrown away like garbage. The world was watching. And for once, the world was learning the right lesson. The meeting took place at a corner booth after the lunch rush, Martha's favorite spot, the one where she used to feed hungry teenagers decades ago. Victoria had flown back in specifically for this, joined by Denise and a corporate consultant named James, who kept nervously adjusting his glasses. Hank sat beside Martha, arms resting on the table, his presence a quiet reminder of what had just happened. Shane and two other Iron Hawks stood by the door, not threatening, just there. "All right," Victoria said, pulling out her tablet. "We're here to discuss the future of this location. But more importantly, we're here to listen. Martha, this is your diner. It always has been. What do you want to see change?" Martha looked around the dining room, the faded wallpaper, the worn booths, the fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. She'd loved this place for 42 years, but she could also see what it had become. Tired, corporate, stripped of the warmth that used to fill every corner. "I want it to feel like home again," she said quietly, "like it did before everything became about numbers and turnover rates." "Specific ideas?" Denise asked gently, pen poised over her notepad. Martha took a breath. "A community wall. Photos of regulars, of families who've been coming here for years. Maybe some pictures from the diner's history, old menus, newspaper clippings. I want people to walk in and see themselves. See that they belong here." James typed furiously on his laptop. "We can allocate budget for that. Professional prints, proper frames." "No," Martha interrupted. "Not too fancy. Just real. Authentic. Like a family photo album, not a museum." Victoria nodded. "Done. What else?" "The staff." Martha glanced toward the kitchen where Eddie was prepping for dinner. "They need better treatment. Fair schedules, actual breaks, a say in how things run. And no more firing people because they're not fast enough. Speed matters, sure, but so does care. You can't have a diner without both." "We're implementing new employee policies company-wide," Victoria said. "Better benefits, annual reviews that factor in customer relationships, not just metrics. Your situation made us realize we'd lost the plot. We're finding it again." Hank leaned forward. "What about community events? This place used to host Little League celebrations, church groups, birthday parties. When did that stop?" Denise flipped through some papers. "About 8 years ago. Corporate pushed for higher profit events only. Private parties that guaranteed minimum spends. That ends now," Victoria said firmly. "Martha, if you want this diner to host community events again, free or low cost, you have full authority to approve them." Martha's eyes widened. "Really? Really? This is your diner? We're just the ones cutting the checks." For the next hour, they hammered out details. A Sunday morning community breakfast where seniors ate free. A homework corner where students could study with free coffee and snacks. Monthly themed nights celebrating local culture. A bulletin board for community notices, lost pets, Job postings, local news. The paint, Shane said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. The exterior paint is peeling. Looks rough. We could fix that. The bikers. James blinked. You want to paint the building? We volunteer every year for Habitat for Humanity, Hank said. We know our way around a paintbrush. If you buy the supplies, we'll donate the labor. This weekend. Make it look new again. Victoria smiled. Her first genuine smile since arriving. That would be incredible. Thank you. What color? Shane asked, looking at Martha. She thought for a moment, picturing the diner as it used to be. The original color. It was this warm cream with red trim. Made it look cheerful, welcoming. Cream and red it is, Hank confirmed. They discussed more practical matters. Updating the menu to include healthier options without losing the classic comfort food, better coffee, a surprising point of passion for Denise, and proper maintenance schedules so things didn't fall apart from neglect. Then Victoria asked the question Martha had been dreading. How many hours do you want to work? Martha folded her hands on the table. This was important. This was her drawing the line. 3 shifts a week. 4 hours each. Breakfast or lunch, never dinner. And I want Sundays off for church and time with my daughter when she visits. She waited for pushback, for negotiation, for someone to tell her that wasn't enough. Instead, Victoria extended her hand. Deal. And Martha? Those are the maximum hours. If you want less, you take less. No questions asked. Martha shook her hand, relief flooding through her. On her terms. Finally. One more thing, Hank said. The Iron Hawks will be coming by regularly. Not to cause trouble, just to eat, to visit, to keep that connection alive. Is that going to be a problem? Denise laughed. After what you did, you could park your bikes in the dining room, and I wouldn't complain. You're welcome anytime. We'll stick to the parking lot, Hank said with a small smile. Less disruptive. As the meeting wrapped up, James pulled out his phone. Would you mind if I took a photo? For the company newsletter. Building a Better Diner initiative. They gathered around the booth. Martha in the center, flanked by Hank and Victoria, with Denise and Shane standing behind. James snapped the picture. 5 people who shouldn't have made sense together, united by a shared understanding that some things mattered more than business as usual. After Victoria and James left, Martha sat with Hank and the bikers, sharing a pot of coffee Eddie brought out. You didn't have to do all this, Martha said quietly. The cookout, the paint job, everything. Hank met her eyes. Yeah, we did. You gave us dignity when nobody else would. That's not something you forget. That's not something you repay with a thank you card and flowers. You repay it by showing up, by standing firm, by making sure the world knows that people like you matter. I'm just one person. You're never just one person, Martha. You're everyone you've ever helped, everyone you've ever fed, everyone you've ever made feel seen. You're all of us, he gestured to his fellow bikers. And we're all you. That's what family means. Outside, the afternoon sun painted Main Street gold. A couple walked past with their dog, waving at the bikers. A mother pushed a stroller, pausing to read one of the messages still taped to the diner window. Life, returning to normal. But better, stronger. Changed by 3 days that proved kindness wasn't weakness, and loyalty wasn't outdated. So, Shane said, breaking the comfortable silence. This weekend. Paint party. Should we bring music? Martha grinned. Only if it's good music. None of that heavy metal screaming. Classic rock. Perfect. They shook on it, and Martha realized with a start that she was looking forward to the weekend. Looking forward to seeing this place transformed. Looking forward to coming back to work on Monday, knowing it would be different. Better. Hers again. Not because she owned it, but because she'd fought for it. Because 91 bikers had fought for her. Because a community had remembered what mattered. And that was worth everything. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the rumble of motorcycles filling Main Street at dawn. Martha stood on the sidewalk with a thermos of coffee, watching 91 bikers unload paint supplies from their trucks. They moved with military efficiency, setting up drop cloths, organizing brushes, preparing scaffolding. Within 30 minutes, the diner's exterior was taped off and ready. You boys know what you're doing? Eddie called from the doorway, grinning. We rebuilt Shane's garage in 6 hours last summer, Hank replied, rolling up his sleeves. A diner is nothing. By noon, the transformation was visible. The peeling gray-white paint disappeared beneath fresh coats of warm cream. The trim blazed red, not aggressive, but cheerful, inviting. It looked like the diner had been given back its youth. Local families arrived throughout the day, bringing food for the workers. Mrs. Patterson showed up with 3 dozen cookies. Tom Morrison brought cases of water. Sarah Chun contributed sandwiches from her shop's cafe. The painting became a block party, kids playing on the sidewalk while adults chatted and laughed. Martha watched it all with tears in her eyes. This was community. This was what the diner had always been meant to be. Sunday morning, the real work began inside. The corporate team had delivered everything overnight: frames, prints, mounting hardware. The community photo wall would stretch along the entire west side of the dining room. Martha sat at a table with Denise and several volunteers, sorting through decades of photographs. There she was at 28, brand new to the job, holding a coffee pot and smiling nervously. At 35, serving cake at the diner's 10th anniversary. At 42, posing with the high school football team after their championship win. At 50, at 60, at 65, her hair graying, her smile constant. But it wasn't just photos of Martha. It was the community. Weddings celebrated in corner booths. Birthday parties with balloons tied to chairs. Little league teams in their uniforms. Families spanning 3 generations, all sitting at the same tables their grandparents once occupied. "This is beautiful," Denise whispered, helping mount a frame. "This is what every diner should be." By Sunday afternoon, the wall was complete. A timeline of love, preserved in fading photographs and happy faces. Monday morning, reopening day, arrived with fanfare. The parking lot filled before they even unlocked the doors. News crews were back, but this time the energy was different. Celebratory, joyful. The Iron Hawks formed their now familiar line along the street, but they decorated their bikes with small American flags and flowers. Festive, not militant. At exactly 7 a.m., Martha unlocked the door. The crowd flooded in, not rushing, but eager. Every booth filled within minutes. Every counter stool taken. The standing area packed with people holding numbers from the waiting list. Martha stood at the host's stand, momentarily overwhelmed, until she felt a hand on her shoulder. Eddie, in his cook whites, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Ready to feed some people?" he asked. She tied on her apron. "Let's do this." The morning rush was controlled chaos, the good kind. Orders flowed, food emerged from the kitchen in perfect timing, and Martha moved through her section like she'd never left. Because she hadn't, not really. This place lived in her bones. But she took her time. She asked about Mrs. Patterson's arthritis and learned it was better. She complimented Zoe Morrison's new haircut. She welcomed first-time customers and made them feel like regulars by the time their food arrived. At 9 a.m., Denise gently touched her elbow. "Martha, we'd like to do something special. A short dedication. Would that be all right?" Martha nodded, suddenly nervous. Denise called for attention, and the busy diner gradually quieted. Hank stood and walked to the center of the room, and people instinctively made space. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. "I'm not much for speeches," Hank began, his gruff voice carrying easily. "But some things need saying. A week ago, this diner made a mistake. They forgot what they were built on. They forgot that places like this aren't just about food. They're about family. About knowing someone's name. About caring when nobody else does." He gestured to the photo wall. "Martha Jensen spent 42 years building that family. She fed us when we were hungry. She listened when we needed to talk. She made this place matter. And when they tried to throw her away, we remembered. We stood up. We said no." The crowd murmured agreement. "But here's the thing," Hank continued. "Martha would have done the same for any of us. That's who she is. She doesn't keep score. She doesn't expect rewards. She just shows up, day after day, and proves that kindness isn't dead. That loyalty still means something. That people matter more than profits." He turned to Martha, his weathered face soft with emotion. "You saved us, Martha. More than you know. More than we could ever repay. But we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying." The diner erupted in applause. Martha covered her mouth, crying again, happy tears this time. When the noise settled, she stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice was steady. I don't know what to say except thank you. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for caring. Thank you for showing the world that family isn't just blood. It's anyone who shows up when it matters. She looked around the room, at faces old and new, at the bikers and the families and the strangers who'd become friends. This diner has always been about more than food. It's about belonging. About knowing that when you walk through that door, someone's glad to see you. That's all I ever wanted. And thanks to all of you, that's what we have again. More applause, wiping of eyes, strangers hugging strangers. The celebration continued all day. Victoria arrived with corporate representatives who'd flown in specifically for the reopening. Local politicians stopped by for photo opportunities, though Martha shooed most of them away with a gentle firmness that made everyone laugh. By evening, when Martha's shift ended, the diner had served over 400 people. Every single one left smiling. She stood outside as the sun set, watching families leave with full bellies and happy faces. The Iron Hawks were packing up, preparing to ride home. Hank walked over, helmet under his arm. You did good today, Martha. We did good, she corrected. All of us. He smiled, then surprised her by pulling her into a gentle hug. See you Sunday morning. Regular table. I'll have the coffee ready. She watched them ride away, 91 motorcycles rolling down Main Street in formation, their engines a thunder that sounded like coming home. The diner glowed behind her, warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the windows, she could see the photo wall, a testament to 42 years of love, of quiet service that had been anything but quiet in the end. Martha locked the door, exhausted but content. Tomorrow she'd rest. Tuesday she'd come back, just like she always had. But now it was different. Now it was better. Now it was exactly what it should have always been. 6 weeks later, Martha stood at the window of Grill House Diner, watching the sunrise paint Main Street gold. Sunday morning, her favorite day of the week now. Right on schedule, she heard them coming. The low rumble of engines, growing louder, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. 91 motorcycles rolled down Main Street in perfect formation, their chrome catching the early light. The Iron Hawks had been coming every Sunday since the reopening. Not to protest, not to guard, just to be present, to have breakfast, to remind everyone, and themselves, what they'd fought for. They parked their bikes along the curb, the same formation they'd held during those tense days that now felt both recent and impossibly long ago. But the energy was different, peaceful, content. This was tradition now, not revolution. Morning, Mrs. J. Shane called as he walked through the door, the first one in as always. Morning, honey. Your usual table. You know it. The diner had been packed every day since the reopening. Not tourist-level crazy, but steady, genuine busy. The kind that came from community, not curiosity. People came for the food, yes, but also for the feeling, the warmth, the sense that someone here knew their name and cared about their day. The photo wall had become legendary. Visitors spent minutes examining the decades of pictures, pointing at familiar faces, sharing stories. A local newspaper had done a feature on it, The Heart of Main Street, how one diner captured a community's soul. Eddie emerged from the kitchen with a knowing smile. The usual orders? Please, Martha confirmed. And make sure Hank's eggs are scrambled dry, not wet. He's particular. After 6 weeks, I think I've got it. Martha moved through her section, filling coffee cups, greeting regulars. Mrs. Patterson at table 3 with her book club. They met here every Sunday now. Tom Morrison and his family at table 7. Zoe chattering about her upcoming science fair project. Joe at the counter, no longer eating alone. He'd become friends with several of the bikers and sat with them now. The homework corner was busy too. 3 high school students had spread out their books, nursing free coffee and working on essays. One of them, a quiet girl named Angela, had confided to Martha last week that she sometimes had no food at home. Martha made sure Angela's visits always included a sandwich or soup, quietly comped on the register as staff meal. The cycle continued. It always would. Denise managed the diner with quiet competence, never micromanaging, always supporting. She'd become friends with Martha, the 2 women sharing coffee after shifts, talking about everything and nothing. The staff turnover had stopped entirely. People wanted to work here now, wanted to be part of something that mattered. As Martha delivered plates to the Iron Hawks tables, she caught Hank's eye. He nodded, their silent Sunday morning greeting. Some things didn't need words. Martha, a woman's voice called from the door. Linda, her daughter, had started flying in twice a month. Today she'd brought her own daughter, Martha's granddaughter Emma, age 7, bright-eyed and curious. Grandma, Emma ran to her, and Martha scooped her up, laughing. What are you doing up so early, sweet pea? Mommy said I could help you work today. Martha looked at Linda, who shrugged with a smile. She's been talking about it all week. Wants to be just like her grandma. Something warm bloomed in Martha's chest. Legacy, not in the headlines or hashtags, but here. In the next generation learning that service mattered, that kindness was strength, that showing up for people was the most important work anyone could do. All right then, Martha said, setting Emma down. First lesson, we always smile at customers, even when we're tired, because that smile might be the only nice thing they get all day. Emma nodded solemnly, taking it in. The morning rush continued. The bikers ate and laughed and told stories. Families filled booths. The community gathered, as it did every Sunday, in this place that had almost been lost and was now found again. At one point, a young man walked in, maybe 19, skinny, with that hollow look Martha recognized instantly. He stood at the entrance, counting change in his palm, clearly trying to figure out if he had enough for breakfast. Martha approached him. First time here. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm kind of hungry, and I heard this place was. Sit anywhere you'd like. Martha interrupted gently. Coffee's on the house for first-timers. What can I get you? His eyes widened. I don't know if I can afford. How about the breakfast special? Eggs, toast, bacon. My treat. She leaned in and lowered her voice. Cook made an extra order by mistake. Hate to see it go to waste. The lie was perfect, practiced, kind. His face transformed, relief and gratitude mixing into something that looked like hope. Really? Now sit down before it gets cold. As he took a seat, blinking back tears, Martha felt Hank watching from across the room. He raised his coffee cup in a small salute. She nodded back. The cycle continued. Would always continue. She returned to the counter where Eddie had another order ready. Business as usual. Beautiful, ordinary, meaningful work. Outside, the Sunday morning sun climbed higher. Main Street came alive with joggers and dog walkers, families heading to church, couples going for brunch. They all passed the line of motorcycles, the diner with its fresh cream and red paint, the photo wall visible through the windows. Some stopped to take pictures. Some just smiled. All of them knew the story now, not because it was on the news anymore. That had faded, as news always did, but because stories like this lived in communities, passed from neighbor to neighbor, parent to child, becoming legend and truth intertwined. The story of a woman who served for 42 years, who was thrown away and fought back, who proved that kindness wasn't weakness, that loyalty mattered, that people would stand up for what was right when given the chance. And as Martha Jensen moved through her section with practiced grace, her granddaughter shadowing her steps, learning the rhythm of service and care, she understood something profound. She hadn't just been saved by the bikers and the community. She'd saved them first, years ago, one plate at a time. And they'd simply returned what she'd always given freely. Love, dignity, the knowledge that everyone deserves to be seen. That was the legacy, not power or fame, but decades of quiet kindness that came back when it mattered most. And in the end, that was everything.